Hello, and welcome back to another episode of General Conference Conversations, the podcast where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm excited to be talking about this talk today. I feel like it fits in kind of really well with one of the talks we discussed the last week, Elder Cook's talk, and so I'm excited to continue to kind of dive into those same topics. I will say right off the top, it is thunderstorming outside, which I love because I love thunderstorms, and it's actually calmed down quite a bit. It's not pouring like it was earlier, and the thunder isn't as loud, but you may still hear it in the background if it's loud enough, and if it starts to like really pour like it sounded like hail earlier. It was so loud and it was so heavy, so just so you're aware, there may be a nice ambient noise in the background of some of these. I'm recording a few episodes today, so we'll see how it goes. But today we are talking about Elder Bangerter's talk, Foreordained to Serve. And like I said, this talk very much went along with kind of the topics that we talked about with Elder Cook's talk, Be One with Christ. Talked a lot about agency in that episode, and the relationship between agency and like outside forces, and so I really highly recommend going and listening to that episode as well. I think these two will really kind of complement each other in the way that I'm going to talk about them, and I'll get into that more in a minute, but definitely is a very interesting talk for me to read. I got a lot out of it, and I had a lot of really interesting conversations with my husband and my best friend, and so it was like a really interesting study session for me, and I really enjoyed recording that episode, so definitely go check that out. But to summarize Elder Bangerter's talk, he of course is talking about foreordination, so he speaks about our individual purposes here on earth, and how our choices in the premortal life direct our life now, and how we can use our agency to fulfill the purpose that God has planned for us. And this talk was specifically directed toward the youth of the church, but it is definitely one of the talks that isn't so specific to the youth that nobody else can get anything out of it, right? Whether you're 16 or 60, you can still think about like your purpose, and it will be in a very different way, obviously, having been on the earth for 60 years rather than 16, but all of this is still very relevant. Honestly, when I was reading through it, after the first 6 or 7 paragraphs, because he does start talking about speaking directly to the youth, and he's quoting President Nelson and quotes that he has said to the youth in like actual youth devotionals and things over the years, so it very much felt obviously directed toward the youth, but after that it gets quite a bit more general, and I kind of forgot that he was like speaking to the youth specifically, that was kind of part of his whole thing. And so it's very much going to apply to everyone, and I really want to focus on the foreordination stuff, which I guess is like most of it, right? The rest of his talk after, when he's talking about, so he talks about foreordination and kind of what foreordination is and what it means, and he talks about kind of his own journey in discovering his own purpose in life, and really using his own personal revelation and his story about him and his dad, and some advice his dad gave him when he was young, that I highly recommend also reading, and really diving into and thinking about. But for the purposes of this episode, I do want to focus on the foreordination part of it, and just a couple of quotes from when he talks about foreordination. So he's talking about before we were born, we were in the premortal life, right? And how God appointed each of us to fulfill specific missions, and that they don't necessarily... Oh, here we go, getting into the quote. So here's the quote. He says, "Those premortal promises and blessings are called your foreordination. The doctrine of foreordination applies to all members of the church. Foreordination does not guarantee that you will receive certain callings or responsibilities. These blessings and opportunities come in this life as a result of your righteous exercise of agency, just as your foreordination in your premortal life came as a result of righteousness." And he goes on to say, like, as you make those choices and progress along the covenant path, then you will receive those opportunities that fulfill that mission that God has given you. And I think it's really interesting. So a small recap of my discussion in the last episode, or 2 episodes ago, with Elder Cook's talk. So that we got very into, so he quotes this professor who is a philosopher, and a philosopher of agency and like free will, and what it means to have free will. Do we really have free will? This like whole big discussion that no one ever has the answers to. Philosophy, right? Like they are philosophizing, whatever that is, right? whatever the verb is for philosophy. But they discuss it at length, right? And so the part of that discussion and that debate that we talked about there is, do we actually have free will? And what does that mean? And particularly, this professor's take on it was that every single decision that we make is basically foreordained, quote unquote, right? Everything that happens to us, every meal that we eat, every piece of DNA that we have, every experience we had growing up, where we grew up, influences us and affects us in such a way that there's only ever one choice that we are going to make in any given situation. And so like that, we don't have free will, because basically our choices are made for us by all of this past stuff that has happened and accumulated to this point, right? And so really interesting to think about. And the article that Elder Cook quotes talks about like how this professor is kind of on the extreme end of this. There's not a lot of philosophers who really believe this. They more debate in the center, in the middle, between like, yes, there are absolutely things that influence our choices and like our upbringing, and even influence what choices we have presented to us, which then affect like how much free will we have, right? Like we can't choose something that we don't know exists, but that there are not a lot who believe that we don't have free will. They more debate how much free will we actually do have, and how much our outside influences affect us and actually influence those decisions. And in this one, in this talk, we're talking about foreordination, and that specifically, in the context of the gospel, means like, what is God's role in influencing our choices, right? And that's another question that comes up in this free will debate is, well, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful, then, and he has a plan for us, and he foreordains us for specific missions, and he gives us specific roles, and he knows the choices that we're arguing to make, so he already knows exactly how everything is going to go. Is that really choice, right? And is it truly agency if everything is already planned out for you? And in this one, it's a little bit different because, like, it comes down to the fact that we don't know. God isn't forcing us to make certain decisions, right? He knows us deeply and is the creator of our nature and our personalities, and so he knows kind of the way that our life is going to go because he knows us. And then, of course, you could argue, like, well, he made us this way, and so our personality dictates, and like all this stuff, right? It's a huge debate, and I'm not going to say that I'm not even close to an expert. I'm not even part of the debate, right? Like, I just stumbled across this doing this podcast, but I'm just saying that's another part of the debate that goes into this, is what's God's role in this. If you believe in God and you believe in agency, how do those two beliefs kind of work in your own belief system? And a lot of different religions believe in it in different ways, right? We specifically believe in foreordination, and we believe that because we believe in a premortal existence, that we had life before this, and that we were able to make choices there, and one of those choices was to come to Earth, that there are things that in the premortal life that we agreed to, the choices that we made, that influence our life now. And we believe that Christ or God has given us specific missions, who, because of our personalities, because of our talents and our gifts, that we are given those specific missions. And we don't talk about foreordination, I feel like, not very often. Sometimes when it comes up in like scripture study, we talk about, Abraham, and like, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew thee, and you were foreordained for this specific like lot in life, right? But I think because it does become such kind of a debate, it's kind of a gray area, not even a gray area, just like a nuanced area of like, well, we don't really know, we don't really understand it, but we do believe that because we have a life before this, then that life affects this one. And so it's interesting, and it's kind of weird to think about, right? Of like, well, God knows me perfectly, so he knows what's going to come out of my mouth next. And it's really kind of trippy to think about it that way. And so I try not to think about it too hard. But it is interesting to think about how the choices, like the choice to come to Earth, has affected this life, and that through the choices that we make here, that God has planned a purpose for each of us. And we may never know what exactly that purpose is, right? And it may not be like when I think of a mission, I think of this big like overarching goal I'm working towards, right? And so that can be like, I was foreordained to be the prophet, right? Not all of us are foreordained to be the prophet, obviously. And it's not like we're foreordained to open a mission in Fiji, or we're not foreordained to birth the Son of God, right? Like that. Those are like big kind of humanity changing events that affect a lot of people, and some of us are foreordained for that, and through our choices that we can fulfill that purpose. But it's not always going to be as grand as that, or as big, or as like noticeable as that, but we still have a purpose. We still have talents and gifts and pieces of our personality that are meant to bless and serve and do things that God wants to get done. And that takes me to this next quote. He says, "Knowing who you are begins with understanding God's foreordained blessings bestowed upon you before you were ever born on this earth. Our Heavenly Father desires to reveal to you your personal foreordination and he will do so as you seek to learn and follow his will. And like, it seems like a really big task, right, to think about what your purpose in life is, and to even think that you have a purpose. Like, I think about that and I'm like, man, that is heavy, right? That is a big question. What is my purpose on earth? It's a question that many people have sought to answer and are seeking to answer, and that's what religion often is people's way of explaining the meaning of life, right? Why are human beings on this earth? Well, there must have been something before, and there must be something after. There must be something that we are working towards, and there must be something, like, an ideal of someone we're trying to be like, and there must be a force or a being in the universe who gives our life meaning, or who has a plan, and that there's a purpose for us being here. And so it's this huge thing, and it can be a huge thing in your life if you want it to be, right? Like, some people really do seek their true purpose and figure out how your talents and gifts can be used to serve God and his children, like, every single day of their lives, right? And some people find that. Some people really, really understand, like, I am here on this earth because of this reason. I'm sure at some point President Nelson was like, I am the prophet. I was foreordained for this, right? Like, my talents and my skills and my gifts and the choices that I made on this earth, like, to be a doctor. He was then called as a prophet during a global pandemic, an unprecedented global pandemic, right? And so definitely, and I think especially as we get older, we see that more. We can look back and we have more experience to be like, these are my talents and these are my gifts, and this is, why I'm here. And I think everybody thinks about it at least a little bit, right? But I also think that it can be really consuming. And it doesn't need to consume you. Like, my brain takes that of, like, you have a purpose on this earth, right? And it says, well, what is your purpose? And why aren't you fulfilling it perfectly? And what if you made the wrong decision 5 years ago and you were supposed to be in a completely different place and you missed your purpose, right? Like, that is where my brain goes when I think about this. Like, it takes it to the extreme of, well, you're failing at your purpose because you're not thinking about it all the time and you're making the wrong decisions, and that can be really, really overwhelming. And I think this really is a perfectionism thing at the end of the day, right? Like, and like it is really a faith thing. But I think about, how do you know if a prompting is a prompting or just your own thoughts, right? And it's, I guess, Elder Bednar, who said, he's like, well, if it's a good thought, it's probably from God. You should just do it, right? Like, it doesn't matter. It does, but, like, because then you can understand how God speaks to you. But in the moment, if you think so much about, well, is this my purpose? Is this why I'm here? Then you kind of have that, like, decision paralysis of, like, is this God? And if it's just me, I don't know. It can get really overwhelming. And actually, in sacrament meeting today, there's a sister who gave a talk about discernment and personal revelation, and actually both the talks were kind of about that. This is the second sister who gave it about wisdom and kind of being true to yourself, even when other people are, like, you can't please everyone, basically, was her, like, whole thing. But this first sister, she talked about the difference between good and correct, or, like, good and perfect, which I thought was really interesting, because she was talking about, she just got home from a mission, like, maybe 3 months ago, and she was like, I had 3 months to basically figure out, like, make a bunch of decisions, right? Where I wanted to go to school, and what I wanted to major in, and like career choices and moving and all this stuff. And something that she found really helpful and really comforting was that God will direct you to do good. And she's like, I really liked that. Like it doesn't say correct, right? God will not, like, he will, like, obviously he'll like things that are right, but the good, right? And I've definitely felt that in my life, where I have come to a decision and I have very much felt from the Spirit, like, both of these are good decisions, and if you choose either of them, I'll be pleased. It's up to you. Like, I could give a million examples, but they're all very personal. The ones that are coming to my mind are very personal. So, but like, and that's been a really interesting and crazy thing to me in my life, of like, both of these decisions are good. It's not right or wrong. It's what you want. It's up to you. It is your purpose. Both of these things will fulfill your purpose and will put you in the places where you need to be. And like, we are expected to be good, not perfect. Like, we cannot be perfect. And there are a million ways that our talents and our gifts can be used to bless others and to serve God. And we can't be perfect in this life, but we can do good. There's that quote, I don't know the original source. All I can think about is that I know it from Cheaper by the Dozen. I should watch that movie. It's been a while. Anyway, basically it goes like, there's no perfect way to be a parent, but there's a million ways to be a really good one. And there's no perfect way to be human, but there are a million ways to be a good one, right? There's no perfect way to be you, but there's a million ways to be good you. And like, it'll all work out in the end. It really will. And we can wonder if we are where we're supposed to be. We can wonder if the choices we're making are the right ones. But at the end of the day, in my belief, in my experience, if we are doing good, and if we are using our talents and our gifts to make people's lives easier and more joyful, we are fulfilling our purpose. We are fulfilling the measure of our creation. And I think that can be really comforting. Again, like, absolutely seek and try to figure out, what your purpose is. And you may come to a point where you're like, this is why I'm here, right? There's going to be, what is that quote? Man, I have so many quotes that are popping into my head now that, like, I don't know who said them, and so I can't tell you where they're from, but basically there's the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And I think it's not always just one day, right? It can be a million different things over a million different years of moments and experiences that you realize, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm here right now. And the best example I have of that is my mission. I did not want to serve a mission growing up. I was very shy and introverted and anxious, and I'm still very introverted and anxious. Less shy now, but mission kind of encourages not shyness, so I learned a lot. But I probably was like 12 or 13 when I realized that I wanted to go on a mission. Or I got the prompting that I should. And I worked toward it for a really long time, and it was kind of always there in the back of my brain. And I ended up not going right when I turned 19. It was actually I finished my associate's degree instead of going right when I was 19, because I just wanted to, it felt like a better kind of stopping point for school. Anyway, so I pushed it back a little bit, and then I was like, okay, I graduate in May. or I get my associate's degree in May, I'll start in like September, right? Well, it took much longer to get my papers in. I kind of procrastinated. It didn't feel like super urgent, and so I just kept forgetting to do things. And then I had to get a wisdom tooth out, and it took me a while to get in with my bishop because he was brand new and busy. And then doctor's appointments and like all of the stuff, right? It's a lot more of a process than just like filling out some papers and turning them in. Like it's there's a lot to do. And so I didn't end up getting my papers in until like right before Christmas of that year. I didn't get my call until February, and I didn't leave until April. And so it was like a full maybe 5 months after I wanted to actually go, or had in my brain, right? Had in my brain as my plan for life, as if that ever happens the way we wanted to. But I was so kind of frustrated during those 5 months of like, I just want this to happen. And I had told people, I'm not going to school right now because I'm preparing to like serve a mission. I'm just working, I'm just whatever. I just kind of felt aimless. And at the same time, I was like getting to be really close with the YSA in my ward, and I was like, I finally have LDS friends. Like I finally have friends that are members, and like all this stuff that was happening. And I was like, why now? Why? I don't understand. And I saw it over the course of my mission. There were definitely many, many times that I would look back and say, this is why. Because if I hadn't come now, I wouldn't be with this MTC district, and I needed these people in my life. If I didn't come now, or I didn't come then, I wouldn't be with this companion now at this time in my mission when I really needed her. If I didn't go then, I wouldn't have met my husband at the time that I did. We probably wouldn't have spent a lot of time together. We wouldn't probably have been in the same district. We wouldn't have known each other as well. If I didn't go then, I wouldn't have met the members that I needed to. I wouldn't have met my best friend at the same time. It would have been very different. I wouldn't have met the amazing people that I taught and that I got to be close with and I learned so much from. It all happened perfectly. Not perfectly, but like in the best way it could have. And I think about that a lot. And I felt that, and I felt my purpose as a missionary, maybe not in life, but I learned my strengths and my weaknesses, and I learned how to speak, or learned how to speak to God. I learned how God spoke to me, and I learned so much about the gospel, and so I really truly do believe that you may never know what your like true overarching purpose is, right? Like we can't always see our own character arc in our life, especially not till much later, but I do think that if we are doing our best to use our talents and our gifts to make other people's lives easier, and giving ourselves grace when we don't measure up or we don't feel like we're doing enough, right? We are fulfilling our purpose. And anyway, so I guess my question is very broad, but how do you think about your foreordination, or have you ever thought about your foreordination, right? Maybe this is something you've never thought about before. It's certainly never something that I had thought about, like my own foreordination. I kind of always brushed over foreordination because it felt kind of weird, right? It's that kind of uncomfortable of like, well, if I was always meant to do this, do I really have a choice? But to think about it this way makes a lot more sense to me, and is a lot more kind of reassuring and comforting rather than terrifying and controlling. So how do you think about that? How do you think about foreordination? What do you think your foreordination is? Like, what do you think your purpose in life? Have you gotten an inkling of, yeah, this is my talent and I'm really good at doing this for people, or I'm really good at this in life and it doesn't have to be strictly spiritual either. I saw a reel. This is not off topic at all, but it's very random. It just popped into my brain. This happens a lot during these when I'm recording. Just like, boom, you have to say this. Is a reel on Instagram the other day, and it was like a skit kind of a thing where the guy was playing the part of a Christian and playing the part of God. And it's Christian praying like, I just want to know your will for me, God. I'm trying to choose between going to school and being like a finance major or going into missionary work. And it's not a part of our church, but a different Christian denomination. And, you know, God's like, well, I made you really good at math. And like, I put all these mentors in your path who are also really good at math. And like, you're really passionate about numbers and about finances and about like money and all this stuff. And it cuts back to the person being like, I don't know, maybe missionary work is just more fulfilling, and it serves you more, and like it glorifies you, God, and I just want to be able, like, I want my life to glorify you, and I just don't know if I can do that in the finance world. And God like cuts back to God being like, no, like, do you not see all the people in the finance world who could benefit from you introducing them to me, of being an example of a good Christian to them? Like, how changing the financial system and like using your talents and the like experiences that you've had in your life to kind of reform the financial system, how that could also be glorifying me, could also be fulfilling your purpose. And it was, I mean, obviously making the point that like, not only being a missionary or being in clergy or going into, you know, they're specifically talking about, you know, the way that their church is structured, but like, there are other ways to dedicate your life to God that isn't like strictly spiritual. Like, you don't think about finances being spiritual, right? But we all have very specific talents and very specific ways of impacting people, and that's our mission. That is what it is. And it might be being a prophet, and it might be being a business owner who, you know, impacts people that way. Like, it's very different. It's very diverse. And so anyway, so how do you think about ordination? What do you think maybe your purpose is? What have you thought about? Patriarchal blessings are a really good thing to fall back on in this kind of instance, right? We have it pretty laid out for us in there. It's not all of our talents and gifts, but it can get us started in the right direction. So it's definitely very interesting to think about. Don't overwhelm yourself. Don't get consumed by it. Remember that as you go about doing good and trying to use the talents and gifts that you do know about and that you do know you have, or that you are developing, is fulfilling your purpose. But it is interesting to think about it that way, and to think about what our individual purpose may be. So that is all I've got for you guys today. I am so grateful for you listening. Sometimes I feel like I'm a rambling, crying mess on these episodes, so I'm grateful for you sticking around and being supportive. So definitely let me know what you think in comments below, in emails, over on Instagram, Facebook as well. I really do love to hear you guys' thoughts. So I will talk to y'all next time.